The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla adjusted her pearl necklace one final time. The grand mirrors in her private chambers reflected a woman who had grown comfortable with power, yet still carried the weight of public scrutiny on her shoulders. Today was different though. Today, she had decided to make a statement that would ripple through the centuries-old traditions of the monarchy. "Your Majesty, the car is ready," announced Lady Margaret Thornfield, her loyal lady-in-waiting, as she entered the ornate bedroom where Camilla sat applying her final touches of lipstick. Camilla turned from the mirror, her blue eyes sparkling with determination. "Margaret, I've made a decision. Cancel the usual Bentley. I want the black limousine today." Lady Margaret's face went pale. The limousine was reserved for the most formal state occasions, and today's schedule included only a visit to a local charity and a brief stop at the Children's Hospital. "Ma'am, are you certain? The protocol clearly states." "I am well aware of the protocol, Margaret," Camilla interrupted, her voice carrying the authority she had learned to wield over the years. "But I am also aware that protocols can be changed. I am the Queen Consort, and I believe it's time people see me as such." The decision wasn't made lightly. For months, Camilla had felt the subtle but persistent undermining of her position. Whispers in the corridors, hesitant bows from staff, and the constant comparison to Diana's memory had worn on her patience. She had tried to win hearts through charity work, genuine smiles, and by supporting King Charles III in every public appearance. But respect, she realized, sometimes had to be demanded. As Lady Margaret reluctantly made the arrangements, Camilla walked to her window overlooking the palace grounds. She could see the guards in their red uniforms standing at attention, their faces stern and professional. Among them was Sergeant James Mitchell, a man whose family had served the crown for 3 generations. His grandfather had protected Queen Elizabeth II during World War II, his father had stood guard during the tumultuous years of Diana's marriage to Charles, and now James carried on the tradition with unwavering dedication. What Camilla didn't know was that Sergeant Mitchell had been having his own internal struggles with the changing face of the monarchy. At 42, he had served for 20 years, watching as traditions evolved and new royals took their places. He respected the institution above all else, but he also believed deeply in the established protocols that had maintained the dignity and order of the royal household for centuries. The call came through his radio at precisely 10:30 a.m. "Sergeant Mitchell, please prepare the black limousine for Her Majesty Queen Camilla's departure at 11:15. James paused mid-step as he was inspecting the morning guard rotation. The black limousine? He knew the schedule by heart, and nothing on today's agenda warranted such formal transportation. His training told him to follow orders without question, but something deeper, perhaps his grandfather's voice echoing in his memory, made him hesitate. "Could you repeat that request?" he asked into his radio, hoping he had misheard. "The black limousine, Sergeant. Her Majesty's explicit request." James felt a knot forming in his stomach. The black limousine wasn't just a car, it was a symbol. It represented state occasions, moments of utmost importance, meetings with world leaders, and ceremonies that would be remembered for generations. To use it for routine charity visits felt, to him, like wearing a crown to go grocery shopping. He thought about his grandfather's stories of Queen Elizabeth II, how she had always been mindful of every detail, every symbol, every message her choices sent to the public. "The crown is not just jewels, boy," his grandfather used to say. "Every decision a royal makes echoes through history." As James made his way to the garage where the limousines were kept, he passed through the servants' quarters where he could hear the whispered conversations of the staff. The palace was a small world where news traveled fast, and word of Camilla's request had already spread. "She's getting too comfortable up there," muttered Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for 35 years. She was polishing silver with more force than necessary, her weathered hands working with the precision of decades of practice. "Now, Eleanor, that's not our place to judge," replied Thomas Hartwell, the butler, though his tone suggested he shared her concerns. "The Queen Consort has every right to make her own choices." "Rights and wisdom aren't always the same thing, Thomas," Eleanor shot back. "I've seen this family through its brightest days and its darkest scandals. I know what works and what doesn't. James paused outside the door, listening to the conversation that reflected his own internal conflict. These weren't gossiping strangers, these were people who had dedicated their lives to serving the crown, who understood the delicate balance between tradition and progress that kept the monarchy relevant and respected. In the garage, the black limousine sat like a sleeping giant among the other royal vehicles. Its polished surface reflected the overhead lights, and its presence commanded respect even when empty. James ran his hand along its sleek exterior, remembering the occasions when he had stood guard as it carried Queen Elizabeth II to her final public appearances, or when it had transported King Charles III to his coronation. The vehicle's history was written in every careful maintenance record, every dignified journey, every moment when it had served as the crown's mobile throne. To James, it wasn't just transportation, it was a piece of living history that deserved to be treated with reverence. His radio crackled again. "Sergeant Mitchell, status on the limousine preparation?" James stood at a crossroads. His entire career had been built on following orders without question, on maintaining the seamless operation that allowed the royal family to function. But his conscience, shaped by generations of family service and deep respect for royal tradition, was pulling him in another direction. "Sergeant Mitchell, please respond," the voice on the radio pressed. James closed his eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "I need to speak with someone about this request," he said into the radio. "There may be a protocol issue that needs clarification." The silence that followed was deafening. In the rigid hierarchy of the palace, questioning orders, especially those that came directly from a member of the royal family, was almost unheard of. James could practically feel the shock waves rippling through the communication system. "Sergeant, your orders are clear. Please prepare the vehicle immediately." With respect, James replied, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart, "I believe this matter requires review by the Royal Protocol Office before I can proceed." What James had done was unprecedented in his career, but it wasn't without precedent in royal history. There had been moments when loyal servants had gently guided their employers away from decisions that might damage the crown's reputation. The most effective royal advisors had always been those brave enough to speak truth to power, even when that truth was uncomfortable. As word of James's hesitation spread through the palace's communication network, it reached the ears of Sir Edmund Fitzgerald, the private secretary to the king, a man whose job it was to navigate exactly these kinds of delicate situations. At 68, Sir Edmund had served 3 different monarchs and had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when the monarchy was about to step on a landmine. "What seems to be the situation with Her Majesty's transportation?" Sir Edmund asked as he made his way to the security office where James had been asked to report. James stood at attention as Sir Edmund entered, his uniform pristine despite the turmoil he felt inside. "Sir Edmund, I have concerns about the appropriateness of using the state limousine for today's scheduled activities. The protocol manual clearly indicates." "Sergeant Mitchell," Sir Edmund interrupted gently, "I understand your dedication to protocol. Your family's service has been exemplary. But we must also understand that protocols evolve, and members of the royal family have discretionary authority over their transportation choices." James felt the weight of tradition pressing down on him like a physical force. "Sir, with the greatest respect, I believe this decision could send the wrong message to the public. The limousine represents something sacred, something that should be preserved for moments of true significance." Sir Edmund studied James's face, seeing not defiance but genuine anguish. This wasn't a subordinate challenging authority for personal reasons, this was a man wrestling with his conscience and his duty to protect an institution he revered. "Sergeant, I appreciate your perspective, but Her Majesty has made her decision. Our role is to support that decision, not to question it." "Then, I request to be reassigned from this duty, sir," James said quietly. "I cannot in good conscience participate in what I believe to be a misuse of royal symbols." The room fell silent. Sir Edmund had dealt with many personnel issues over the years, but never had he encountered someone willing to sacrifice their career over what others might consider a minor transportation choice. The gravity of James's conviction was unmistakable, and it forced Sir Edmund to consider whether there might be wisdom in the sergeant's concerns. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Queen Camilla was growing impatient. She had chosen her outfit carefully, an elegant navy dress with matching hat, and was ready to make her statement to the world. The delay in her transportation was beginning to irritate her, especially since she suspected it wasn't due to mechanical issues. "Margaret, what is taking so long?" she asked, checking her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Lady Margaret had been fielding increasingly tense phone calls from the security department and was struggling to find a diplomatic way to explain the situation. "Ma'am, there seems to be a minor security review in progress. Nothing to worry about, but these things do take time." Camilla's intuition, honed by years of navigating royal politics, told her that something more significant was happening. "Margaret, I want the truth. What kind of security review delays a simple car preparation?" Before Lady Margaret could craft another diplomatic response, there was a knock at the door. Sir Edmund entered, his face carefully neutral but his posture indicating the seriousness of his visit. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the delay. There has been a concern raised regarding today's transportation choice, and I felt it best to address it with you directly rather than allow any misunderstandings to escalate." Camilla's eyes narrowed. She had learned to read between the lines of royal speak, and she understood that concern raised meant someone had objected to her decision. "Who raised this concern, Sir Edmund?" "Sergeant James Mitchell, Your Majesty. A longtime guard whose family has served the crown for generations. He has expressed reservations about using the state limousine for today's engagements." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Camilla felt a familiar flush of anger and frustration rise in her chest. Once again, she was being questioned, her judgment second-guessed by people who seemed to believe they understood royal protocol better than she did. "And what, precisely, are Sergeant Mitchell's reservations?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. Sir Edmund chose his words carefully. He believes the limousine should be reserved for state occasions and is concerned about the public perception of using it for routine charitable visits. Camilla stood slowly, her full height adding to the authority in her voice. "I see. So a man whose job is to follow orders, not to interpret royal policy, has decided that he knows better than the Queen Consort how to conduct herself?" "Ma'am, I believe his concerns come from a place of deep respect for the monarchy and its traditions," Sir Edmund offered carefully. "Respect?" Camilla's voice rose slightly. "Is it respectful to question my decisions? Is it respectful to delay my official duties because of his personal opinions about what I should or shouldn't do?" The confrontation that had been brewing for months was finally coming to a head. This wasn't really about a limousine, and everyone in the room knew it. This was about authority, respect, tradition, and the delicate balance of power that kept the monarchy functioning. It was about whether Camilla would be allowed to define her own role or would forever be constrained by others' expectations of what a queen consort should be. Outside in the courtyard, Sergeant James Mitchell stood at his post, knowing that his career was hanging in the balance. He could see other guards glancing in his direction, some with sympathy, others with disapproval. Word had spread quickly through the ranks, and opinions were divided. Some saw him as a guardian of tradition, a brave man standing up for the principles that had kept the monarchy stable for centuries. Others viewed him as an insubordinate employee who had overstepped his bounds and forgotten his place in the hierarchy. As the minutes ticked by, James reflected on the choice he had made. He thought about his grandfather's stories, his father's dedication, and his own 20 years of faithful service. Had he thrown it all away for a principle? Or had he honored his family's legacy by standing firm in his convictions? The palace walls, which had witnessed centuries of drama, intrigue, and momentous decisions, seemed to hold their breath as the confrontation unfolded. The outcome would set a precedent that would echo through future interactions between the royal family and their staff, between tradition and progress, between authority and conscience. In this moment of tension, everyone involved understood that they were participating in something larger than themselves, a test of the very foundations upon which the modern monarchy was built. The tension in Queen Camilla's private sitting room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Sir Edmund stood before her, waiting for her response to the unprecedented situation. Through the tall windows, the gardens of Buckingham Palace stretched out in perfect order, a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold within the palace walls. "I want to see this Sergeant Mitchell," Camilla declared, her voice carrying the steel that had helped her survive decades of public scrutiny. If he has something to say about my choices, he can say it to my face." Sir Edmund's face went pale. In all his years of service, he had never been asked to arrange a direct confrontation between a member of the royal family and a security guard over a matter of protocol. "Your Majesty, perhaps it would be more appropriate if I handled this matter through proper channels." "Sir Edmund," Camilla interrupted, standing and moving to the window where she could see the guards in the courtyard below. "I have spent years trying to earn respect through quiet dignity and patient service. I have endured comparisons, criticisms, and constant questioning of my every move. Today, that ends. If this man believes he has the right to obstruct my decisions, then he will explain himself directly." Lady Margaret exchanged a worried glance with Sir Edmund. They both understood that what was about to happen could either strengthen Camilla's position or create a scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks. The British press had a voracious appetite for royal drama, and a confrontation between the Queen Consort and a palace guard would be front-page material. "Very well, Your Majesty," Sir Edmund conceded reluctantly. "I'll arrange for Sergeant Mitchell to be brought up immediately." As Sir Edmund left to make the arrangements, Camilla turned to Lady Margaret. "I know what you're thinking, Margaret. You believe I should let this go, maintain the peace, avoid making waves. But sometimes making waves is necessary to reach the shore." Lady Margaret had served in royal households long enough to recognize the signs of a monarch who had reached their breaking point. She had seen it with King Charles during his darkest moments with Diana, and she had witnessed Queen Elizabeth II rare but memorable displays of royal authority. When pushed too far, even the most patient royal could become a force of nature. "Ma'am, I only worry about the precedent this might set," Lady Margaret said carefully. "If staff members feel they can question your decisions directly, then perhaps they need to be reminded of exactly who I am," Camilla replied firmly. "I am not a guest in this palace, Margaret. I am the Queen Consort, and it's time I started acting like one." Down in the security office, Sergeant James Mitchell was receiving news that made his stomach drop. Chief Inspector Williams, his immediate superior, looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. "James, I've been in this job for 15 years, and I've never had to tell a guard that the Queen Consort wants to see him personally because he objected to her transportation choice," Chief Inspector Williams said, shaking his head. "What were you thinking?" James stood straighter, drawing strength from his family's legacy of service. "I was thinking about the oath I took to protect the dignity of the crown, sir. Sometimes that means protecting it from decisions that might diminish its standing." "And you think you're qualified to make that determination?" Williams asked, though his tone was more curious than accusatory. He had worked with James for over a decade and knew him to be one of their most reliable and principled guards. "My grandfather served during the war, sir. He told me stories about times when loyal servants had to make difficult choices to protect the monarchy. Not from external threats, but from internal missteps that could have damaged the crown's reputation." Williams had heard these stories too. The royal household was full of legends about brave servants who had quietly guided their employers away from potential disasters. But those were different times, and the delicate art of offering unwelcome advice had to be balanced with respect for royal authority. "James, Her Majesty wants to see you in her private sitting room. This is completely unprecedented. Are you prepared for whatever might happen?" James thought about his wife Sarah and their 2 children waiting at home. His job provided them with a good life and security, and he was about to risk it all for a principle. But he also thought about his grandfather's stories and the pride in the old man's eyes when he spoke about serving something greater than himself. "Yes, sir. I am prepared." The walk through the palace corridors felt like the longest journey of James's life. He passed portraits of monarchs stretching back centuries, each one representing the continuity and dignity he believed he was defending. The clicking of his boots on the marble floors echoed like a countdown to a moment that would define his career and possibly his life. Other staff members he encountered along the way looked at him with expressions ranging from admiration to pity. Word had spread throughout the palace with the speed that only gossip could achieve in such a closed environment. Some saw him as a hero standing up for tradition, others as a fool throwing away his career over a car. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield stopped him near the grand staircase. "James, dear, are you sure about this?" she asked, her maternal instincts overriding protocol. She had known him since he first started as a young guard, fresh-faced and eager to serve. "As sure as I can be, Mrs. Whitfield," he replied. "My grandfather always said that the hardest part of serving the crown isn't facing external enemies, but knowing when to speak up when you see something that might harm what you're sworn to protect." Eleanor nodded slowly. She remembered James's grandfather, a man of unshakable principle who had earned the respect of everyone in the palace. "Your grandfather would be proud of your courage, even if he might question your timing." As James continued his journey, he reflected on what had brought him to this moment. It wasn't just about the limousine. Over the past months, he had watched as small breaches of protocol had been overlooked, as traditions had been bent or ignored in the name of modernization. Each incident alone was minor, but together they represented a pattern that concerned him. He had seen other royal households where the gradual erosion of standards had led to larger problems. Protocol existed not to create arbitrary rules, but to maintain the dignity and mystery that kept the monarchy relevant in a democratic society. When that dignity was compromised, even in small ways, it could lead to larger crises of respect and authority. The door to Queen Camilla's sitting room loomed before him. James took a deep breath, straightened his uniform one final time, and knocked. "Enter," came the authoritative voice from within. James stepped into the elegant room where Queen Camilla sat in a high-backed chair, every inch the picture of royal authority. Lady Margaret stood slightly behind her, and Sir Edmund positioned himself near the window. The tableau was carefully arranged to emphasize the power dynamic and leave no doubt about who was in charge. "Sergeant Mitchell," Camilla said, her voice cool and measured. "I understand you have concerns about my choice of transportation today." James came to attention and bowed appropriately. "Your Majesty, I have served this household for 20 years with nothing but loyalty and dedication. My concerns come from that same loyalty." "Explain your concerns," Camilla commanded, leaning forward slightly in her chair. James chose his words carefully, knowing that everything he said would be analyzed and remembered. "Your Majesty, the black limousine has traditionally been reserved for state occasions and events of national significance. Using it for routine charitable visits, while certainly within your authority, might send a message to the public that could be misinterpreted." "And what message would that be, Sergeant?" Camilla's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "That the significance of royal symbols is diminished when they're used casually, Your Majesty. The limousine represents the gravitas and ceremony of the crown. When it appears at every event, regardless of importance, it loses its impact and meaning." Camilla stood slowly, her full presence commanding attention. "So you believe I am too trivial for such transportation? That my charitable work doesn't deserve the same dignity afforded to other royal activities?" "That's not what I meant, Your Majesty," James replied quickly, sensing the dangerous territory he was entering. "Your charitable work is invaluable and deserves great respect. I'm concerned about preserving the special nature of royal symbols so they maintain their power when truly needed." "I see," Camilla said, walking slowly around the room. "And who determines when these symbols are truly needed, Sergeant? You? The Protocol Office? Or perhaps you think I should ask permission from the press before making any decision about how I conduct my duties?" The room was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Everyone present understood that this conversation had moved far beyond transportation logistics and into fundamental questions about royal authority and the relationship between the monarchy and its staff. "Your Majesty," James said quietly, "I took an oath to protect the crown. Sometimes that means protecting it from well-intentioned decisions that might accidentally cause harm." Camilla stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "And who are you to determine what might harm the crown? You stand guard, Sergeant Mitchell. You don't make policy, you don't analyze public opinion, and you certainly don't have the authority to override my decisions based on your personal interpretation of protocol." James felt the full weight of royal displeasure bearing down on him, but he stood firm. "Your Majesty, my family has served 3 monarchs across 3 generations. We've learned to recognize when the crown needs protection, even from itself. The audacity of his words hung in the air like a challenge. Sir Edmund stepped forward, sensing that the conversation was approaching a dangerous precipice. Perhaps we should return to finding a practical solution to today's transportation needs. No, Camilla said sharply. I want to hear more about Sergeant Mitchell's theory that I need protection from my own decisions. Please, Sergeant, enlighten me about the mistakes I'm making. James realized he had crossed a line, but retreat was no longer possible. Your Majesty, I'm not criticizing your judgment. I'm trying to protect the institution we both serve. The monarchy survives on dignity, mystery, and the careful preservation of its symbols. When those symbols become commonplace, the monarchy itself becomes commonplace. And you believe that's what I'm doing? Making the monarchy commonplace? Camilla's voice was dangerously quiet. I believe that every choice sends a message, Your Majesty. And some messages, once sent, can't be taken back. Lady Margaret watched the exchange with growing alarm. This was exactly the kind of confrontation that could spiral out of control and create lasting damage to relationships within the royal household. She had seen similar situations in other royal homes where wounded pride and stubborn principle had led to bitter conflicts that took years to resolve. Sir Edmund was calculating the potential fallout from this conversation. If it ended badly, it could result in Sergeant Mitchell's dismissal, but it might also create sympathy for his position among other staff members. Worse, if the story leaked to the press, it could be portrayed as evidence that even the palace staff didn't respect Queen Camilla's authority. Camilla herself was fighting an internal battle between her anger at being questioned and her recognition that James's concerns, however inappropriately expressed, came from genuine dedication to the monarchy. She had spent years trying to prove herself worthy of her position, and having that worthiness questioned by a palace guard felt like a personal attack on everything she had worked to achieve. Sergeant Mitchell, she said finally, your dedication to the crown is noted. But your understanding of your role in protecting it is fundamentally flawed. The crown is not protected by preventing its representatives from exercising their legitimate authority. It is protected by supporting those representatives and allowing them to fulfill their duties without obstruction. James felt the conversation slipping away from him, but he made one final attempt to explain his position. Your Majesty, I've watched this family through good times and bad. I've seen how small decisions can grow into big problems. My grandfather was there during the abdication crisis. He saw how King Edward VIII's seemingly minor choices about protocol and dignity eventually led to disaster. The reference to the abdication crisis was a bold and dangerous gambit. Everyone in the room understood the implication that seemingly small breaches of protocol could escalate into existential threats to the monarchy itself. It was a comparison that could either validate James's concerns or be seen as an insulting suggestion that Camilla's choices were comparable to those of the king who gave up his throne for love. Camilla's face went white with controlled fury. Are you comparing my decision about transportation to the abdication crisis, Sergeant? James realized he had made a critical error, but it was too late to retreat. I'm saying that protocol exists for a reason, Your Majesty. Every generation thinks the rules don't apply to them, that they can modernize without consequences. But the rules exist because they work. The rules, Camilla said slowly, were created by people, Sergeant. People who understood that institutions must evolve to survive. I am not bound by the limitations others might place on me, especially when those limitations come from outdated assumptions about what a queen consort can or should do. The confrontation had reached its climax. Two fundamentally different philosophies about tradition, authority, and change had collided in the ornate sitting room of Buckingham Palace. On one side stood a queen consort determined to define her own role and command respect through the exercise of authority. On the other stood a guard representing generations of service and a deep belief that tradition was the foundation upon which the monarchy's legitimacy rested. The resolution of this conflict would have implications far beyond the immediate question of transportation. It would establish precedents about how the royal family interacted with their staff, how traditions could be modified, and whether loyalty included the right or obligation to offer unwelcome advice. As the two strong-willed individuals faced each other across the elegant room, both understood that this moment would be remembered and discussed in palace corridors for years to come. The outcome would shape not only their own futures, but the culture and dynamics of the royal household itself. The silence that followed Camilla's last words was deafening. The ornate clock on the mantel seemed to tick louder than usual, marking each second of the standoff between the queen consort and the palace guard. Outside, life in London continued normally, but inside this room, the very foundations of royal protocol were being challenged and reshaped. Sergeant James Mitchell stood at attention, his face pale but resolute. He had crossed lines that most palace staff wouldn't dream of approaching, and he knew there would be consequences. But something deeper than career preservation was driving him now, a sense that this moment was about more than just one transportation decision. Queen Camilla studied his face, reading the determination there. She had dealt with critics before, from the press, from public opinion, even from members of parliament. But this was different. This challenge came from within her own household, from someone sworn to serve and protect her. The betrayal felt personal and professional at the same time. "Sir Edmund," she said without taking her eyes off James, "what is the proper procedure when a member of the palace staff refuses to carry out direct orders from the royal family?" Sir Edmund cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, technically speaking, Sergeant Mitchell hasn't refused to carry out orders. He has requested clarification through proper channels regarding protocol concerns." "That's a very diplomatic way of describing insubordination," Camilla replied coolly. "But I appreciate your attempt to find a middle ground." Lady Margaret stepped forward carefully. "Ma'am, perhaps we might consider this an opportunity to review our transportation protocols more broadly. If there are concerns among the staff about appropriate usage." "Margaret," Camilla interrupted, "are you suggesting that my judgment about when to use palace vehicles needs to be reviewed by the staff?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Lady Margaret realized she had inadvertently suggested that the Queen Consort's decisions should be subject to approval by her subordinates, a notion that struck at the heart of royal authority. James Mitchell felt the conversation spiraling toward a conclusion that would satisfy no one. He had raised his concerns, but instead of opening a dialogue about preserving royal dignity, he had created a confrontation that was threatening to undermine the very institution he was trying to protect. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "may I speak frankly?" Camilla's eyebrows rose. "Haven't you been speaking frankly already, Sergeant?" "I mean beyond the immediate issue at hand, ma'am. About what this conversation is really about." Sir Edmund and Lady Margaret exchanged alarmed glances. The last thing they wanted was for this confrontation to expand beyond the specific incident that had triggered it. "Very well," Camilla said, settling back into her chair. "Tell me what you think this conversation is really about." James took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either heal the rift he had created or make it irreparably wider. "It's about respect, Your Majesty. And trust. And the delicate balance that keeps this institution functioning." "Explain," Camilla commanded. "Your Majesty, for 20 years I have watched members of the royal family navigate the impossible challenge of being both ordinary people and extraordinary symbols. I have seen the toll that public scrutiny takes, the way every decision is analyzed and criticized. I understand the pressure you face to prove yourself worthy of your position." Camilla's expression softened slightly, though her posture remained regal and alert. James continued, "What I failed to understand until this moment is that my concerns, however well-intentioned, have become part of that pressure. By questioning your decisions, I've contributed to the very problem I was trying to solve." "And what problem is that, Sergeant?" Camilla asked, her voice less sharp than before. "The problem of making you feel that you have to fight for respect even within your own household. The problem of treating you as someone who needs to be managed rather than someone who should be served." The admission struck everyone in the room with its honesty. James had articulated something that had been simmering beneath the surface of palace dynamics for months, the sense that Camilla was still being treated as an outsider despite her official position as Queen Consort. "Your Majesty," James continued, "I realize now that my grandfather's stories about protecting the monarchy might have been about a different kind of protection than I understood. Maybe protecting the crown sometimes means protecting the people who wear it from those of us who think we know better." Camilla stood slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where tourists gathered beyond the gates, trying to catch a glimpse of royal life.
Sergeant Mitchell, do you know what the hardest part of this job is?
No, ma'am.
It's not the public criticism or the press attention.
It's the feeling that even the people closest to you are waiting for you to make a mistake, ready to step in and correct you before you embarrass yourself or the institution.
She turned back to face the room.
I have spent years trying to earn the respect that should come automatically with this position. I have been patient, diplomatic, and careful. But today I decided that perhaps respect isn't something to be earned through perfect behavior, perhaps it's something that must be claimed through the confident exercise of legitimate authority.
Lady Margaret found her voice.
Ma'am, I don't think anyone questions your right to that authority.
Don't they? Camilla challenged. Then, why do I feel constantly second-guessed? Why does every decision I make seem to require justification? Why am I the only member of this family whose choices are subject to debate by the staff?
The questions were rhetorical, but they exposed a truth that everyone in the room recognized. There had been a subtle but persistent pattern of treating Queen Camilla differently from other royals, as if her authority were somehow less absolute or her judgment less trustworthy.
Sir Edmund spoke carefully. Your Majesty, if there has been any impression that your authority is not fully respected, it was entirely unintentional. The staff's dedication to you is absolute.
Is it?
Camilla asked. Or is their dedication to an abstract ideal of what I should be rather than to who I actually am? James felt compelled to answer.
Your Majesty, speaking only for myself, my loyalty has always been to you personally as well as to your position. But I may have confused protecting the monarchy with protecting you from your own choices, and I see now how insulting and counterproductive that was. The conversation had evolved from a simple confrontation into something more complex, a negotiation about power, respect, and the relationships that made the royal household function. All four people in the room understood that they were participating in a moment that would define future interactions within the palace walls. Sergeant Mitchell, Camilla said thoughtfully, your family has served this institution for generations.
In all that time, have there been other moments when loyal servants had to choose between following orders and protecting the crown? James considered the question carefully.
Yes, Your Majesty.
My grandfather told me about times when staff members had to make difficult choices. But he also told me about times when they were wrong, when their concerns were based on outdated thinking or personal prejudices rather than genuine institutional needs.
And which category does today's incident fall into?
I'm beginning to think it falls into the second category, ma'am.
I think I let my attachment to tradition blind me to the possibility that tradition might need to evolve. Camilla nodded slowly.
Sergeant, tradition is important.
Protocol matters.
But tradition that cannot adapt becomes mere stubbornness, and protocol that serves the past rather than the present becomes meaningless ritual. She walked back to her chair but remained standing. I chose the limousine today not because I thought the charity visit was equivalent to a state occasion, but because I believe that every appearance by the Queen Consort is significant. When I visit sick children or support charitable causes, I represent the crown just as much as when I attend formal ceremonies. The logic was compelling, and James found himself seeing the situation from a completely different perspective. The limousine wasn't being used inappropriately, it was being used to reinforce the importance of royal charitable work and to demonstrate that the Queen Consort brought the full dignity of her office to every public engagement. Furthermore, Camilla continued, I believe that the symbols of monarchy should serve the monarchy, not the other way around. If I must earn the right to use palace resources through some external judgment of worthiness, then I am not truly the Queen Consort, I am merely someone playing the role under supervision. Sir Edmund recognized the wisdom in her words.
Your Majesty, I believe you have articulated something important about the nature of royal authority. Perhaps our protocols need to be reviewed to ensure they support rather than constrain appropriate exercise of that authority. Lady Margaret nodded in agreement.
Ma'am, if our adherence to traditional practices has made you feel questioned or undermined, then we have failed in our primary duty to support you effectively.
James felt the weight of realization settling over him.
His grandfather's stories about protecting the monarchy had been formed in a different era, when the threats to royal dignity came primarily from external sources. In the modern world, the greater danger might come from internal restrictions that prevented the royal family from adapting to contemporary expectations.
Your Majesty, he said formally, I owe you an apology.
Not just for questioning your decision, but for approaching it from a place of assumption rather than understanding. I assumed that protecting tradition meant preventing change, when perhaps it means ensuring that change serves the institution's best interests.
Camilla studied his face, reading the sincerity there.
Sergeant Mitchell, your concerns came from genuine loyalty, even if they were misdirected. That loyalty is valuable, but it needs to be channeled in ways that strengthen rather than undermine royal authority.
Yes, ma'am. I understand that now. Do you?
Because I want to be certain that this conversation has resolved the underlying issue, not just the immediate disagreement.
James straightened to full attention.
Your Majesty, I understand that my role is to support your decisions, not to evaluate them. I understand that protocol serves you, not the other way around. And I understand that questioning your judgment, however well-intentioned, undermines your authority and, therefore, weakens the very institution I'm sworn to protect.
Good, Camilla said with satisfaction.
Because I intend to continue making decisions based on my judgment of what best serves the Crown and the British people. Some of those decisions may challenge traditional practices, and I need to know that my household will support rather than second-guess those choices.
Sir Edmund stepped forward. Your Majesty, you have our complete support.
If today's incident has revealed any weaknesses in our protocols or procedures, we will address them to ensure they serve you more effectively.
Excellent, Camilla replied. Now, about that limousine.
James felt his stomach tighten, uncertain whether he was about to be assigned to prepare the vehicle or to clear out his locker.
Sergeant Mitchell, I want you to personally oversee the preparation of the black limousine for my departure in 30 minutes.
I want it perfect, polished, fueled, and ready to carry the Queen Consort on official business.
Can you do that?
Yes, Your Majesty.
Absolutely. And, Sergeant? I want you to ride in the security vehicle that accompanies the limousine today.
I want you to see firsthand how the public responds when the Queen Consort arrives with the full dignity of her office.
James was stunned.
Rather than being dismissed or transferred, he was being given the opportunity to understand her perspective directly.
Yes, ma'am. It would be an honor.
It's not an honor, Sergeant.
It's education. You need to see that using royal symbols appropriately isn't about following rigid rules, it's about understanding when those symbols can best serve their purpose.
As the formal meeting began to wind down, Lady Margaret approached Queen Camilla privately.
Ma'am, that was masterfully handled.
You turned a potential disaster into a teaching moment. It wasn't just about teaching him, Margaret. It was about establishing that I will not be treated as a provisional queen consort whose every decision requires validation.
Today's incident was going to happen eventually. Better to address it directly than to let resentment build.
Sir Edmund was making notes about protocol reviews and staff training, understanding that this incident had revealed systemic issues that needed attention.
The royal household would need to adapt its culture to fully support Queen Camilla's exercise of authority.
Meanwhile, James Mitchell made his way back to the garage, his mind reeling from the conversation. He had expected punishment and received education instead. He had challenged royal authority and been shown how to channel his loyalty more effectively. As he began the careful process of preparing the black limousine, he reflected on how the confrontation had revealed truths that no one had been willing to speak directly. Queen Camilla had been struggling against subtle but persistent undermining of her authority, while the staff had been operating from outdated assumptions about their role in protecting the monarchy. The resolution had required honest communication from all parties and a willingness to examine fundamental assumptions about tradition, authority, and respect. It had also demonstrated that effective leadership sometimes meant confronting problems directly rather than allowing them to fester beneath the surface of diplomatic politeness. As James polished the limousine's already gleaming exterior, he understood that he was preparing more than just transportation. He was preparing a statement about royal authority, institutional dignity, and the evolution of centuries-old traditions to meet contemporary needs. The black limousine gleamed under the afternoon sun as it pulled away from Buckingham Palace, carrying Queen Camilla to her charitable engagements. In the security vehicle following behind, Sergeant James Mitchell watched the public's reaction to the formal procession, seeing it through completely new eyes. Children pressed against the barriers lining the route, their faces lighting up with excitement as the impressive convoy passed. Adults straightened with respect, many removing their hats or placing hands over hearts. The limousine wasn't just transportation, it was a moving symbol that conveyed the gravity and dignity of the monarchy to everyone who witnessed its passage. "Quite a response," commented Chief Inspector Williams, who was riding beside James in the security car.
"The public seems to appreciate the formality."
James nodded, finally, understanding what Queen Camilla had been trying to achieve.
"She's not just visiting a charity today.
She's demonstrating that the Crown considers charitable work to be of state-level importance."
The limousine sends that message more clearly than any speech could.
As they approached the children's hospital where the Queen Consort would make her first stop, James observed how the staff and volunteers had prepared for her arrival. Despite being told it was a routine visit, they had clearly sensed the significance of the formal transportation and had elevated their own preparations accordingly. The limousine's presence had created an atmosphere of occasion that enhanced rather than diminished the event's importance. When Queen Camilla emerged from the vehicle, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew she had made the right choice. Her decision to use the limousine hadn't been about personal comfort or status, it had been about reinforcing the message that her work represented the Crown's values and priorities. James watched as she interacted with the sick children, their families, and the hospital staff. There was nothing casual or routine about these interactions.
Each conversation was meaningful, each gesture deliberate.
The formal arrival had set a tone that elevated the entire experience for everyone involved. Back at Buckingham Palace, the ripple effects of the morning's confrontation were already being felt throughout the staff. Word had spread about the unprecedented meeting between Queen Camilla and Sergeant Mitchell, but the details remained known only to those who had been present. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield found herself fielding questions from curious colleagues as she went about her afternoon duties.
"What really happened up there, Eleanor?" asked Thomas Hartwell during their break in the servants' hall.
"We heard voices raised, but no one saying what was actually discussed." Eleanor chose her words carefully. She had served the royal family long enough to understand the importance of discretion, but she also recognized that the staff needed to understand how the morning's events might affect their own relationships with the royal family. "What happened," she said thoughtfully, "was a conversation that was long overdue. Her Majesty established some important principles about how decisions are made in this household, and I believe we all learned something valuable about our roles." The ambiguous answer satisfied no one, but it also prevented the spread of gossip that might distort the actual events. Eleanor understood that the truth would emerge gradually through changed behaviors and new approaches to protocol, rather than through detailed accounts of private conversations. In his office, Sir Edmund Fitzgerald was conducting his own analysis of the morning's events. As private secretary to the king, he was responsible for ensuring that the royal household operated smoothly and that any potential problems were addressed before they could escalate into larger issues. He made notes about protocol reviews that would be necessary, staff training that might be beneficial, and communication improvements that could prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. But, more importantly, he was considering how to institutionalize the lessons learned from Queen Camilla's decisive handling of the situation. The real issue, he wrote in his private journal, was not about transportation protocols but about authority dynamics. The Queen Consort has established that her decisions will be implemented without debate, while also demonstrating remarkable leadership in turning a potential crisis into a learning opportunity. Sir Edmund recognized that Queen Camilla had achieved something significant that afternoon. She had claimed her full authority as Queen Consort while simultaneously maintaining the loyalty and respect of her staff. The confrontation could have created lasting resentment, but her handling of it had instead strengthened her position within the household hierarchy. Meanwhile, Lady Margaret Thornfield was reflecting on her own role in the morning's events. As Queen Camilla's closest advisor, she had been caught between her instinct to avoid conflict and her duty to support her employer's decisions without question. "Ma'am," she said as they prepared for the Queen Consort's second engagement of the day, "I want to apologize for not supporting your transportation choice more strongly from the beginning. I should have recognized that your decision was well considered rather than questioning whether it was appropriate."
Camilla looked at herself in the mirror of the limousine as they traveled between events.
"Margaret, loyalty isn't about blind agreement.
It's about trust. I need advisors who will discuss concerns with me privately and, then, support my decisions publicly.
What I don't need is advisors who assume I haven't thought through my choices."
I understand, ma'am. It won't happen again. Good. Because this morning's incident was just the beginning.
"I intend to make several changes in how I conduct my duties as Queen Consort, and I need to know that my staff will adapt along with me." Lady Margaret felt both excitement and apprehension about what these changes might entail. Queen Camilla had clearly been planning a more assertive approach to her role, and the limousine controversy had simply provided the catalyst for implementing those plans. As the day progressed, the success of Queen Camilla's formal approach became increasingly evident. At the charity luncheon, board members and major donors treated her with a level of deference and attention that exceeded their usual interactions with royal visitors. The limousine's arrival had signaled that this was not just another celebrity appearance but a serious institutional engagement. During her speech to the assembled donors, Queen Camilla addressed the importance of royal patronage directly. "When the crown supports your work," she said, "it does so with the full weight of centuries of tradition and the complete commitment of the royal family. Today's formal presentation reflects that commitment and ensures that your vital work receives the recognition it deserves." The audience responded with enthusiasm that went beyond polite applause. They understood that they were witnessing a queen consort who was fully embracing her role and using royal symbols to amplify their charitable mission rather than simply lending her presence to their cause. In the security vehicle, James Mitchell was documenting his observations, understanding that he would be asked to report on the day's events and their implications for future protocol decisions. What he was witnessing challenged many of his assumptions about when formal royal symbols were appropriate and effective. "Chief Inspector," he said to Williams, "I think I've learned something important today about the difference between preserving tradition and understanding its purpose." Williams, who had served in royal protection for even longer than James, nodded thoughtfully. "That's the difference between good guards and great guards, Mitchell. Great guards understand that they're protecting not just people and procedures, but the institution's ability to fulfill its mission effectively." As the afternoon wore on, news of Queen Camilla's formal approach to her charitable engagements began reaching the press. Royal correspondents noted the use of the state limousine and speculated about its significance, but, without inside knowledge of the morning's confrontation, they interpreted it simply as evidence of the Queen Consort's growing confidence in her role. The positive press coverage validated Queen Camilla's instincts about the public's response to formal royal presentations. Rather than seeing the limousine as excessive for charitable work, commentators praised her for bringing appropriate dignity to important causes and for demonstrating the crown's serious commitment to charitable initiatives. Back at the palace that evening, the staff began processing the day's lessons in their own ways. Some recognized that they had been unconsciously treating Queen Camilla as less authoritative than other royals, while others understood that their protective instincts had sometimes undermined rather than supported her position. James Mitchell spent considerable time that evening writing a detailed report about his conversation with Queen Camilla and his observations during the day's engagements. The report would become part of the palace's institutional memory, helping future staff understand how to balance loyalty with appropriate deference to royal authority. "Today I learned," he wrote, "that protecting the monarchy sometimes means protecting its representatives' right to evolve and adapt royal traditions rather than constraining them within historical patterns that may no longer serve contemporary needs." The report also included his observations about public response to formal royal presentations and recommendations for protocol adjustments that would better support the Queen Consort's exercise of authority in future situations. When Queen Camilla returned to the palace that evening, she found a note from King Charles III, who had heard about the day's events through palace communication networks. "My dear Camilla," the note read, "I understand that today brought both challenges and opportunities. I'm proud of how you handled both and look forward to hearing about your plans for continuing to strengthen your position as Queen Consort." The support from her husband validated her approach and confirmed that her assertive handling of the limousine controversy had been seen as appropriate and necessary by the person whose opinion mattered most. As she prepared for bed that night, Queen Camilla reflected on the transformation that had occurred in just one day. She had moved from feeling constantly second-guessed to having her authority clearly established and respected. The confrontation with Sergeant Mitchell had been difficult, but it had forced important conversations that might otherwise have been postponed indefinitely. More importantly, she had discovered that claiming her full authority as queen consort didn't require being harsh or unreasonable. It required being clear about expectations, confident in decisions, and willing to address problems directly rather than hoping they would resolve themselves through diplomatic patience. The lessons learned that day would influence how Queen Camilla approached her role for years to come, and how the palace staff understood their responsibilities to support rather than manage royal family members. The incident had revealed underlying tensions that had been weakening the household's effectiveness, and resolving them had strengthened everyone involved. As Sergeant James Mitchell returned home to his family that evening, he carried with him a deeper understanding of service, loyalty, and the complex relationship between tradition and progress. His children asked about his day, and he told them simply that he had learned something important about helping others succeed rather than trying to prevent them from making mistakes. The transformation was complete, but its effects would continue rippling through the royal household for months and years to come. Queen Camilla had established her authority, the staff had learned to channel their loyalty more effectively, and the institution itself had demonstrated its ability to address and resolve internal conflicts constructively. The black limousine sat in the palace garage that night, no longer a symbol of controversy but a reminder of how appropriate use of royal symbols could strengthen rather than diminish the monarchy's effectiveness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but they would be met by a royal household that better understood its own dynamics and purposes. The palace walls, which had witnessed the morning's tension, now held the memory of its successful resolution, another chapter in the long history of an institution that survived by adapting wisely while preserving what truly mattered.